Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar about growing data centers without breaking the grid, the Irish model. I am personally very much looking forward to this webinar. As you know, most of the data centers in the world really are in the US still today. And now as they're spreading, thanks in part, to regulation, where we're trying to geographically locate data closer to the users, and thanks also to the needs, the technical needs for this data to be closer to the users, we're seeing a little bit more international spread of these data centers in Europe. We're seeing it across countries like, of course, the UK, Spain, France, Italy, and so on and so forth. But there is one country that has so many data centers already, is well ahead here in Europe, which is, of course, Ireland. And they have worked out different models on how to actually integrate these data centers, which are nearly 20% from what I hear, into the grid. So I'm very much looking forward to see what lessons the rest of the countries can learn from this experience, and how even that experience could be done even better, next time around. First of all, just to welcome you all, ask you please if you could introduce yourselves in the chat. Just tell us who you are, your company, and where you're joining from today, because we always get a kick out of it. And just so that you know, we're actually organizing this event as part of Rema Data Centers, which is in Spain, in Zaragoza next year. If you want to join, if you're interested in being part of the development of all the data centers in Spain, we're looking forward to having you here. But we also, look at Italy and other countries. So we're very much looking forward to hearing about the Irish model. Now, I have with me today two experts in this topic, and I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves so that you can get to know them a little bit better. So, Andrew, please, if you could take the mute off and just introduce yourself briefly so
Yep.
people can get to
Hi,
know you.
hi everybody. Andrew Tobin is my name. I'm a director and head of European data centers at Turner and Townsend. Great to be here.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome. And next, I'd like to introduce also Keith, who's going to be another of our panelists today.
Thanks. Yeah, great to be here. Keith Newman is my name. I'm a partner in an Irish law firm, Mason Hayes Curran, working as part of their energy and data center teams. So great to be here. Looking forward to the webinar.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew and Keith. Okay, so I don't like to delay things very much. Just at the beginning, just wanted to give you a little bit of context of why we're doing the event and why it's important. Although I'm sure that, if you're here, is because you already know it's important. I wanted to get you to the expert, but now we're ready to go. I just wanted to give you some housekeeping rules so that you know how what to expect. We have two presentations, first from Andrew and then from Keith. And then at the end, we have some time reserved so that you can ask your questions. It is a lot better when you ask questions, because this is when we actually get the value from having two people here that we're live. Yes, we're not seeing you right now, you're seeing us, but we are to answer your questions, and that will make it a lot better. To ask your questions, please use the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen. Don't use the chat. The chat is there for you to chat with other colleagues, introduce yourselves, but please use the Q&A box, because that will make it a lot easier for us to actually check the different questions and answer them, and just for us to manage it. Also, we are recording this webinar, and you'll have access both to the webinar and the materials, and then you should receive them either later this week or latest at the beginning of next week. So without further ado, I'd just like to ask Andrew, actually, I think Maria's sharing your screen, right? So
Yep.
just to get ready, and there we go. The presentation is being loaded. And then we will begin with the presentation. And in the audience, please take notes and get your questions ready. Okay, here we go, Andrew. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Belen. Thank you. Great to be here. As I said, Andrew Tobin is my name. I'm director and head of data centers for Turner and Townsend. For those of you who don't know, Turner and Townsend, they're an independent program and cost management specialists. And in the recent few years, they have a partnership now with CBRE. So in the data center space, we deliver data centers from project inception, advisory, right through to delivery, execution, and then onto operation. And that's what CBRE's core business for the last number of years globally. As I say, it's great to be here talking to so many professionals that have an interest in the data center industry as I have. So we move on to the next slide and the brief agenda that we're going to go through. I'm going to touch on Ireland's rise as a data center hub. I'm going to give some context for those who may not understand the Irish history and the model and how we became a data center hub. I'm going to then touch on how that large growth and quick, rapid expansion led to grid strain and innovation for delivery of some of the larger projects that we built here in Ireland. We're going to look then at Spain's outlook and see how lessons can be learned from the Irish model and ensure longevity in the Spanish delivery. And we're going to see how we can do that with some grid resilience and some topics and lessons learned. I'm going to wrap up then with some key takeaways, and then I'm going to pass over to Keith, and then we can do a Q&A at the end. So we're going to kick off then with the next slide. So to give you some background, Ireland is a small country. There was less at the beginning when we started the journey on data centers. There was less than 5 million people in the population. To go back even further, the 1980s and 1990s, there was very high unemployment and high interest rates in Ireland. The government at the time targeted foreign direct investment because they knew that the indigenous market couldn't sustain what Ireland needed as a country. So what they did was they did some ingenious ways and put in some good policies around allowing foreign direct investment to come into the country. They freed up third level education for every citizen of Ireland. They leveraged the skilled construction workers, which were the base of our labour pool at the time. And then they brought in some tax incentives. The tax incentives were originally meant for pharmaceuticals, for large pharmaceutical fabrication and production. But when the digital economy came to Ireland, they realised that those tax incentives also worked for data centres and large blue chip clients coming into Ireland and headquartering in Ireland and availing of some tax incentives. So that's what gave us the great growth. But as you can see, there was some foundations laid much earlier on, going way back to the late 80s and early 90s to allow this economy to flourish. So move on to the next slide. So what that led to, and as I said, it was a very rapid growth, but in a very, very small grid. So the Irish grid is about 6 gigawatts. And to put into context, the planned DCs that were planned for Ireland were around 1.9 gigawatts. Now, it took us about 10 years, and we've delivered around 1 gigawatt. Now, there are some larger projects that are still on hold, but some of those larger projects towards the end of the last decade had to come up with innovative ways to deliver that capacity because the grid couldn't sustain it. So we had to go look at alternative methods, some gas generation systems, battery energization systems, going away from the traditional designs. And that's what they had to do. The reason that 1.9 gigawatt planned DCs put so much pressure on Ireland was that the Dublin metropolitan area alone has a capacity of 1.7 gigawatts. So to think about it, your main capital city has less demand on it than what your data centers that you're going to build. It wasn't balanced in any way at all. And to add to that, then the network was aging. It's the original network that was put in at the energization of Ireland 50 years ago. There are huge upgrades required. And then also, when we add renewables into that factor, the renewables mainly are based on the west coast of Ireland where all the wind is, but that's too far away to be connected to the main grid, to the metropolitan area where we want to avail of it outside Dublin and in around the M50 belt, as we call it, which is the semicircle around the Dublin area on the east coast. Now, it's not all bad. There is some capacity, however, it's not in optimum locations. So we are looking at that at the moment, how we increase the viability of the sites that are away from the Dublin area, that are in the border Midlands and West regions of Ireland, away from metropolitan areas, and also then looking at the connectivity to those locations. So there are some other sites that are feasible, but they're not optimum at this time. Move on to the next slide then. We see what Spain's outlook is. As you know, Spain's grid is a lot larger. It's a lot larger country, and it has a lot more going for it than Ireland because you have a larger infrastructure and it's there probably longer than ours. You have a lot of subsea connections. You've got great connections in Bilbao, Barcelona, around the network connections around Madrid, etc., and the Aragon region. However, that can lead to grid congestion, and that's exactly what we saw in around the Dublin metro region. You don't want that to happen. So what you're going to have to do is, you're going to have planning restrictions in certain areas and allow planning for other areas and other larger data centers outside the metro regions, so you don't get this gridlock that we found ourselves in. The other positives that Spain has for itself at the moment is you've got a good energy mix. You've got good solar, good renewables with traditional power generation systems. Obviously, the large amounts of heat that's rejected from data centers, you're going to have to deal with that in certain ways, but there are innovative ways to do that. As we see, there are ways to build data centers in desert regions, in the Middle East, in warmer regions, and that can be done. So there's no fear about it. But I think the key items to pick up on here is don't get stuck around the likes of Spain or the likes of Madrid and the connectivity areas that you want to be. Have those flexible approaches and be open to those flexible approaches. We move on then to see how your grid resilience, then you can do that. As I say, have hybrid solutions. Be open to those hybrid solutions. Force the industry as a whole to come up with different data center designs, not the traditional data center cookie cutter designs that we build all over the world. Make them work for Spain. Flexible site selection is another one. Be open to areas that you may not have earmarked for data centers, or you may not have zoned for data centers or commercial use, but it may be good because it's connected to public transport. It may be good to local employment areas. It may be connected to the power station substations locally. So be open to that. The next thing that you can do, which Ireland didn't do very well at the beginning but is doing now, is having that decentralized development, but also categorization. Understanding the different types of data centers. So hyperscale data centers, the larger data centers that we've seen being built in the last number of years, colo and enterprise. Obviously, the enterprise needs to be, need to look at where they're located, because they need to be closer to the metropolitan hubs, because the end user needs to get access to them. Similarly to the colo providers, they can be slightly further out in the suburban areas, but also they need access to those data centers. And then the hyperscalers, they can locate on their own in more remote areas because they're self-sufficient. They don't necessarily need customers to come in and out to access the data, etc. They can run themselves. So there are certain ways that can be done. Creating and implementing strong policies to protect your grid. In 2019, Ireland created a policy around decentralization and protecting the grid. However, the policy wasn't implemented, and it was updated. Sorry, just go back to the last. I'm not there yet. Sorry. The grid was pushed on in 2019, but not implemented in 2021. And then you can also then build incentives around the correct places to build and stipulate reinvestments in your grid. I'll move on to the key takeaways. As I say, the Irish model shows that you can create a data center hub, particularly in a small country. You need flexibility. It needs to be built in at a very early stage. Spain, it has to act fast and don't get gridlocked. Don't get stuck into the metropolitan areas. But there's a lot of positives going for Spain, and there's a lot of areas that you can develop and a lot of infrastructure that you can align. And as I say, the best projects must be grid aligned from the very, very beginning, and you must be developed in the correct areas to stop and not get bottlenecked, similar to the way that Ireland has done and similar to the way that we're seeing in the likes of Frankfurt and Amsterdam. You don't want to end up in a situation like Amsterdam and Ireland where there's certain moratoriums on development. You want to be open to that development and allow that to happen as much as possible. So I know I went through a lot of that very quick, but I do want to hear Keith's presentation, and we want to leave some time for Q&A.
Thank you very much. You did go quite quick. Thank you, Andy. I just have a question. So really quickly, it's not a question that anyone sent, just off-grid, like mini-grid type data centers. Are you considering anything like that? Is this a realistic goal for the next few years?
In Ireland there's the mini grid setup, and then PPAs to do with biogas and gas power generation systems. Well, obviously Ireland doesn't do anything with nuclear power, so the SMRs are not a runner for Ireland. But definitely biogas and alternative gas generation is something that we are seeing in the market. However, then we also have similar restrictions then on the gas system, because natural gas is another power source for Ireland that we don't want to put pressure on that grid as well. So we also are looking at different innovative designs around the backup. Going away from diesel generators, going to HVO, going to battery energization systems. So there are lots of different innovations going around. Obviously, when you are dealing with the colo and enterprise models, they are dealing at a price per megawatt. So then the innovations tend to be, structured by price, and you need to keep at a certain level. Where the larger sites they can absorb larger cost increases for doing different innovations in design. So that's where you really need to be pushing towards the larger hyperscale clients that can afford to do this innovation at the early stage.
Okay. There's, I suppose, also less likely to do it because they need so much more resilience. But
Yeah.
just because grid connection is the sticking point, isn't it? But anyway,
Yeah.
thank you very
100%.
much, Andrew. We'll get together again and we'll talk during the questions. But Keith, in the meanwhile, if you want to give your presentation, there's so much to talk about here. Okay,
Yeah, great.
There used to be a car alarm, like a car is getting stolen around the area where Andrew is. Not just a joke, but there was a car alarm going on. Go on, Keith. Yeah.
No, you're okay. Sorry, I was just enjoying Andrew's presentation, kind of sitting back. So I have to get myself up for my presentation here now. So my name is Keith Newman. As I said, I'm a partner with an Irish law firm, Mason Hayes Curran. And for those who aren't familiar with Mason Hayes Curran, we're a full service law firm based in Dublin. But we've also got offices in London, New York, and San Francisco. We primarily advise on Irish law, but we have partnered with other law firms where we've worked on international projects, mainly across the EU. So, like I said, we're a full service law firm, but we do have some key sector focused teams, which are comprised of specialist lawyers with a particular focus on sectors like energy and data centers. So you have the specialist knowledge of a lawyer who also has the insights of a particular sector. And in terms of data center clients, we advise them on the full life cycle of their projects, from early stage site acquisition, permitting, energy, financing, and then in the secondary M&A market. So enough about me. Let's get on with the presentation. So just the next slide. Yeah. So just the agenda. I think Andrew's presentation sets this up nicely. So what I'd like to do is maybe just do some extra bit of scene setting around the data center industry generally, because there's quite a lot of noise and excitement around the industry, but from a European perspective, but particularly in the US. So I think it's important to kind of just focus on a couple of those points. So next slide, please. So I think Andrew touched on it there, and it's a very important point, and that quite often industry or media commentary group all types of data centers into the same large energy category, but they each have different use cases, and with those use cases, they have dramatically different electricity demand profiles, water use. And very important, they depending on the use case, they have different levels of locational flexibility. So I think from that point of view, I've kind of tended to see from the data centers to be grouped into the kind of same group and treated in the same manner from both a policy and regulatory perspective. So I think when you're forming policy or regulations targeting the data center sector, I think it's important to bear that in mind. So next slide, please. So I think just to highlight some of the activity in the investment in the sector, like particularly over the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen unprecedented levels of investment flowing into the sector. So the four big tech hyperscaler companies, and we all know who they are, but they've based on current reporting, their capital expenditure and in the infrastructure side of their businesses is projected to approach $300 billion in 2025 alone. And IT consultancy Gartner estimates that there will be a total spend of $475 billion in the data center sector, which is up 42% on 2024. So it's quite significant. And then there was a McKinsey report earlier this year that estimates there'll be a requirement of $5.2 trillion of investment in the data center sector up to 2030. So those numbers are absolutely astronomical. And we've also seen then just over the last week or 10 days, and I think this is on the back of pretty clever and successful regulatory and policy announcements. We've seen quite a lot of significant AI and data center investment announcements from various companies in relation to projects that will be commencing in the UK. Like we've seen announcements from Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, and NVIDIA. And that all falls on the back of the UK government's AI action plan, which has included designating data centers as critical infrastructure, and also designated certain areas that are better suited to these large scale AI hyperscale developments. Now, all of that is great and it's all very positive, but with the scale of development and the speed of development that we've seen in the data center sector, it brings it back to the theme of the webinar. Most jurisdictions are struggling with grid constraints. I think if you look at any site, the number one constraining factor is grid and access to grid capacity. If you can sort that, you'll more than likely sort out most issues with the site. Sorry, if you want to go on to the next slide, please. So just to give you some information around the energy crunch. So typical AI chips are kind of requiring anywhere from 10 to 15 times more power than a conventional site. And we've also seen the speed of development outstripping the pace of grid infrastructure expansion. And we've kind of seen some quite novel examples in the US, where certain hyperscalers are utilizing temporary tent structures to front load the capacity, such as their desperation to have access to the capacity, while their permanent campus has been built out over a period of 18 to 24 months. So that's just a sign of how critical the need is for data center capacity. So next slide, please. This then kind of brings us on to the question of sustainability. So there are significant and valid concerns around the sustainability of data centers, as well as their water and energy use. And I know Andrew can speak to this with more authority, but designs are advancing and projects are becoming more efficient. But I think data centers can incentivize and drive sustainable investment in both grid infrastructure, renewable electricity build out, and crucially grid stability as well. But again, bringing it back to the big tech hyperscaler example, combined, they have contracted close to 50 gigawatts of renewable energy, which is comparable to the entire generation capacity of Sweden. So while they are driving a lot of the data center development and the burden on various electricity grids around the world, they are also doing their part in facilitating the build out of quite a lot of renewable energy projects. And also I think it's an untapped potential in quite a lot of data center projects out there, and it's not something Ireland has done particularly well to now, and there's a lot of work to do, but this is in relation to district heating. So there is quite a lot of work that we could do on this. But data centers, by their very nature, produce quite a lot of wasted heat that can be recirculated back into district heating systems. Next slide, please. So just to give you a very, very quick overview of the kind of regulatory structure in Ireland, and I'll move straight on to how our grid policy has evolved to its current point. So obviously, the various elements of a data center project that you need to pull together in Ireland, you need to get your necessary real estate rights. Why I'm mentioning that is that there are certain regulatory requirements that the TSO sets down, in that if you're constructing contestably built assets, they need to have minimum ownership requirements before the TSO will accept them. So that's a requirement under your grid connection agreement. Then you have to obviously get the secure planning permission for both your data center campus and your grid connection assets. And we're seeing a very interesting trend in Ireland where planning permissions are being granted with very specific energy requirements in there. So there are specific planning conditions that need to be satisfied and adhered to at certain points throughout the development, primarily at the pre-commencement phase. A lot of these energy planning conditions are focusing on a requirement on the developer to secure or enter into sufficient corporate PPAs which offset the level of electricity supplied by fossil fuel sources at the site. And other conditions are aimed at regulating the use of on-site gas generation and kind of ensuring that they're only used in certain limited circumstances. Water connection is another big one where you have to go through your usual feasibility study and engagement with Irish Water. And when I was pulling together the materials for this, I came across quite an interesting fact in relation to the water use of data centers in Ireland. So it's a little bit of an old figure, but dating back to 2021, the overall percentage of data center usage or data center water usage in Ireland was less than 1%. Which is quite interesting. Maybe that's a sign of our temperate climate and our abundance of supply of water, given the amount of rains here. But moving on, then you obviously then need your EPA licenses and your CRU licenses. So CRU is the Energy Regulator Ireland. That's required for any backup generation, and then your EPA license for any greenhouse gas emissions. So just moving on to the next slide. So in relation to grid capacity, Andrew kind of spoke to it quite well, and I'm just going to put some more meat on the bones to what he said. So the Irish electricity regulatory structure is you've got the CRU, which is the energy regulator, and you've got EirGrid, which is a single TSO, and ESB, which is the DSO. We don't have multiple TSOs or DSOs in Ireland. And on the back of the successful build out of data centers, kind of from the early 2010s up to 2020, this kind of contributed to a perfect storm where there was significant security of supply concerns on the Irish grid, such that the Irish regulator in 2021 issued a direction to the TSO and the DSO to effectively restrict the ability of data centers connecting to the grid. It introduced significant criteria that data center developers would have to satisfy, which effectively meant it was very, very difficult for data center developers to secure new electricity grid connections. To build on that, then the Ireland's TSO EirGrid then imposed greater restrictions on data centers connecting to the greater Dublin area. And that was primarily due to the fact that there was a concentration of data centers within the greater Dublin area. And also there was significant grid infrastructure upgrades needed. So just to build on Andrew's point, I think there was a combination of probably a lack of investment on the grid infrastructure in Dublin, combined with significant expansion of our data center sector. So this then in turn left quite a lot of data center developers and investment on hold. So a year later, the government released a data center strategy paper, which kind of set out its position on what type of data center projects they would provide preference to. They were kind of categories around economic impact, grid efficiency, what level of renewables they're going to bring to the grid, whether they were co-located with energy supply, whether the data center developer had decarbonisation and net zero goals, and what level of engagement they had with local communities. So that policy statement was great, but it didn't lead to any legislative changes. So now we're looking at a new large energy user connection policy in Ireland, where effectively we're waiting for a final decision, but effectively that's going to look like a kind of a set of criteria, 6 or 7 criteria that a data center developer will need to adhere to. These are going to focus on the location of the data center and whether they're going to be located at a network or a location in the network that is heavily constrained. There's going to be emissions reporting placed on data center developers. There's going to be a requirement to bring dispatchable on-site generation, and crucially for that generation to be connected to and participate in the single electricity market. An important point was that the set of criteria won't impose a requirement that that 100% of the demand will be flexible. So there is potential for the demand to be 100% firm, but that'll be decided on a case by case basis. And maybe just to touch on one of the points that Andrew referenced in his presentation was around gas connections. So in tandem with the energy regulators' decision to limit connections for data centers to the electricity grid, that then drove data centers to seek to secure connections to the gas network, and then construct on-site gas generation which would then meet its electricity needs. So the Gas Networks Ireland, the gas regulator, quickly stepped in and is not permitting any new data center connections to the gas network for the reasons that Andrew set out. So if you want to go on to the next slide, and I'll just wrap it up now. So I suppose key takeaways, that's a kind of a very brief overview of the Irish data center sector. So what key takeaways can you take from that forward into the Spanish model? I think it's very, very important that there's, from a policy and regulatory point of view, that there's clarity of direction, certainty of desired outcome, and real urgency in decision making. I think one of the key issues or concerns in Ireland is I suppose has been the speed of decision making around some regulatory and policy decisions, and that has hampered quite a lot of or prevented quite a lot of investment in the sector. And I think it's also just focusing on the positives that a data center can bring in terms of grid enhancements, enabling new renewables connecting to the grid, and also from a grid balancing perspective. Data center designs are evolving, and there is an ability for certain data centers to provide flexible demand, and that is a useful tool for data centers or for transmission system operators in balancing the grid. So I think that's me. I hope people found that helpful. I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Keith. Very, very interesting as well. Going into a bit more detail there, how the system changed. Here's me thinking that you did it right first time, but no, you're also rejigging. So good. We do have a few questions, but before that, I just wanted to ask, you did mention water. You said that in Ireland is not, such a big issue. But I mean, we have discussed water very little, but this is something that Spain is a slightly different matter. Should we worry more about water than electricity? Because depending who you ask, sometimes they say, nah, water is not such a big deal. So I just wondered, should we consider water? There's many people here from different countries as well. I saw Kenya, Cape Town, France, Germany. Is water something we have to care about? More so than electricity? Are we looking at the wrong thing? I just would like to ask the two of you to maybe put this in context first.
Yeah, I'll maybe go first, but I'll defer to Andrew just on the kind of the technical ability for data centers to kind of flex more on electricity use and conserve water depending on the cooling technology that's implemented on site. But I think, the water usage hasn't been a huge issue in Ireland. It's mainly been constraints on the electricity network. But in my prior role, I worked with a large hyperscaler, and we were developing a project in Spain. Water was a key issue, and water restoration, water sustainability was a key factor that was assessed during the planning process. And in terms of your engagement with local communities, local government, that would be, depending on the jurisdiction that you're developing in, that is going to be a key issue. How it's addressed, it kind of depends on where the project is located. If it's located in an area of water scarcity, you really are going to have to focus on water restoration projects and what you can do in terms of sustainable design and limiting your water use. I don't know, Andrew, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, no, I think that we've gone away from the air cooled solution that uses high levels of water where we're trimming the temperature you're using in mist, and then there's high levels of water wastage. I think more data centers now are going towards, you know, a liquid to chip design and a closed loop, and then there won't be as much waste as we've seen before. So I think, you know, everybody is, you know, always concerned about the PUE and the WUE value of the design. So it's something that we do focus on, and something that every you know, developer wants to be in front of. But I think, as I say, the designs are getting more and more you know, cognizant of that, and we're going towards, you know, better water usage.
Of course, the cheapest option is still to put water on, but if, you know, that option is not there, then you can look at other options, of course. And I think water is changing a lot. Like even last week, I was reading a news piece in the BBC that local communities stopped tankers being delivered to this billionaire's house whilst they were like restricted shower times or something of the sort, you know. So this is only a matter of time, because, and this is in the UK, where I don't know if it rains as much as in Ireland, but probably like what you would expect quite a lot of rain. So okay, let's go with the questions. Let's see if other people that we have still connected, please send some more questions through, because you're being really shy today. So the first question is from Maria. I'm just going to follow the order for now, right? And then I have a few more others here that I can ask. So Maria asks, what do you think about using biomethane in Ireland for data centers? And this is a good question, and perhaps you can talk about biomethane, but expand a bit more into whether gas is something that people, data centers are active in Europe, because of course it's not so gas friendly as there in the US. So sort of what is the expectation and the trend going forward?
Yeah, I know I touched on that in the presentation. There are a number of companies that are looking at using biomethane. It's not direct source biomethane power generation. It's an offset and using a PPP. That the I suppose based the volume of biomethane isn't there, and then, you know, in Ireland, in larger countries, that may be a case that there may be a case for it, you know, for direct powering. But there definitely is a case to be made for it. But again, we're still restricted by gas connection. So the ones that I have seen coming across my desk recently are using solid oxide fuel cells, and then using biomethane and carbon withdrawal to make it a full carbon neutral. And then you know, it's basically 95% carbon neutral, because you are adding the biomethane into it. But it is a full end-to-end solution, and there are a number of people looking at it. It's just not at the scale at the moment that, and again, it probably leads into where we are on our journey. If you had smaller data centers, you know, you know, less than 10 megawatts, you may look at this as a solution. But the backlog that we have in Ireland at the moment are for larger developments, and it's just not a runner at the moment, but it is getting there. And, you know, obviously when we're using solid oxide fuel cells, it's also hydrogen ready. So there are a number of different ways to power the data center.
If you want to add anything, or you're happy with this?
Yeah, I suppose maybe just to touch on the biomethane industry in Ireland generally, it's very much in its infancy. There are certain kind of schemes to encourage the development of biomethane production facilities. So yeah, like I kind of largely agree with what Andrew said, but yeah, I certainly think there's potential for smaller data centers, but the larger ones would struggle.
Okay, so what you said is 10 megawatts and less are okay if you look at this, but you just don't have enough biomethane, which makes sense, to be honest, because it's hard to capture, it's hard to make. But I mean, sorry, I missed something out here. How much is in your queue now to connect in Ireland of data centers? Because you've already got like nearly 20% of your grid capacity tied up in data centers. So when this queue sort of goes through, realistic queue, how much of it are you going to have tied in? 25, 30, 35?
I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know of a number of large projects that have been put on the back burner because they can't get that connection. So as I say, we've delivered around 1 gigawatt. I would say it would probably go to 1.3, 1.4 gigawatts if we were to allow the projects that are on hold. But it again, you'd have to check with the planning authority to see how many are actually in the pipeline. But it's not something that I'm tracking at the moment.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
there are various figures out there, kind of expressed as a percentage of Ireland's overall demand burden. I think they're like anywhere from kind of 25 to 28% of our overall demand will be from data centers. That's assuming that all of the permitted data centers in Ireland are actually constructed and connected to the grid. So, in short, it depends.
It's a lot as well,
Yeah.
you're really thinking that is like massive user of energy, 25%, 28%. That is like insane. So I'm really looking forward to see what happens also because, you're sort of stretching a basic infrastructure that costs trillions to the max. Really, this
Yeah.
is the point. And how are we investing in these grids? Are we investing enough to keep them for the foreseeable? It's a good question. We can have another time. Let's continue with these ones. Um, can you talk a bit more about the new innovative DC designs that can prevent grid congestion? Yes, you mentioned this, Andy. I think it was you. Um, I'm interested as well to hear, how.
Yeah, again, being more efficient with the power that you are actually connected into. A lot of the designs that are coming from, like, traditionally, when we were building data centers and designing them, in the past, we were based on 8 kilowatts per rack. If there is a more dense solution, and that you can be more efficient with the rack space that you have, or the chipsets that you are using are actually using their full potential. Some of the chipsets that we're using at the moment for GPU and AI are only using 20 or 30% of the actual power that they use to power on. So you're only getting a small percentage of what they're actually capable of. So being more efficient with the power that you have can alleviate a lot of the grid congestion. But also, I think what I was trying to touch on there was being more flexible in where you're located, because, as I say, there are capacity, and there are areas that do have connection capabilities in Ireland, but it's not in an optimum area, so it's not a viable option for the business. So changing that viewpoint of where you actually want to develop versus the optimum area around the metros, and then working with the local authorities and the government to have that connection, the connectivity between the hubs and the data center. It's key. So there's a couple of different aspects there. But yeah, that's I suppose that's where I was going on. But I'm sure there is lots of different ways and lots of different designs out there, to make more efficient use of what you've got.
So just to understand well, is this hardware sort of a structure and hardware design, or are we talking even about software design because of the DeepSeek, issue? And now recently I read some news piece, a little discontextualized, unfortunately, because I don't remember the details, but the Chinese have proven once again they can do the same as the Americans or better with like about a tenth of the power and resources. So like, what are we talking about here exactly?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, the being more efficient on the chip usage is a hardware issue. But then also, I'm not qualified to talk about the software side of it, but I do know that there are, from previous employment, I do talk to the guys, and they do say that there are innovations coming in the software end of it as well, that, to reduce latency, etc., where they can actually have better connection to each data center hub that they have. So again, yeah, it's a mix of both, but it depends. Obviously, as Keith said, it depends. It depends on your usage. It depends on your end user. It depends on your business model. And again, not all data centers are the same, and they're not all used for the same things.
Yeah, thank you. No, I understand that it's both. It's just I just wonder the people who are building the data centers, the big, large scalers and the smaller companies, how much are they pushing for the software efficiency, let's say, versus just building. But I understand that you're not an expert on this. It's just really a question because I was reading about the article that how they layer the information made all the difference, how quickly and how to reduce latency, not only to improve the results but also significantly to change what it spends in terms of energy. So
Mhm.
that's where the energy comes from. Maybe with time, we have like better answers about this. And the next one is very similar. It says, what are the different aspects of a DC being grid aligned? So a data center being grid aligned.
Do you want to take this one, Keith? I don't want to talk too
Yeah,
much.
no. I think it's actually directed at you, Andrew.
Yeah, I
Just
think
some
so.
of these kind of technical requirements.
No worries. No, yeah. The grid alignment again is that piece of being located. What we saw in Ireland when we developed data centers, a lot of them, because if you know the geography of Ireland, Dublin is on the east coast and it's circulated by a ring road, and a lot of the energy topology runs along that ring road and then branches out to the west and to the north, south, east, and west of the country, or the north, south, and west. So a lot of those developments were developed along those nodes that fed the rest of the country. But if you get in early enough and you are developing your grid along with your data center designs, you can actually locate them in optimum locations where it helps you balance your grid, and then you can be aligned to where your development is and also that your grid infrastructure is, and you avoid the congestion that we got, along the nodes of the transmission lines. And that's what you don't want, because everybody wants to be right beside each other and connecting locally to the transmission. So I suppose that's where I was going with the grid line comment.
Yeah, I suppose the thing here is that data centers require the grid, so they have to adapt to it, even though the grid wasn't thought with the needs of the information in mind.
Mm-hmm.
You need like a full, let's just start again kind of thing. Oh dear. It's one of those things, isn't it? Like I have a friend who's really old, but he for me says that God created the world, in 6 days, but only because there was no previous infrastructure. Otherwise, it would have taken him several years. Anyway, okay, next. Andrew, can you comment on the fluctuating loads associated with data centers and its impacted on voltage and frequency and associated solutions?
Yeah, I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'm not gonna I'm not gonna say that I know completely about this, but I do know from an operational side, a lot of the large hyperscalers in Ireland have agreements with the electricity supply board, and at times that they need to offset, if there's not enough renewables, say during the summer there's not enough wind, they can offset up to 20%, and they have that agreement that they will go on to generated power if they need to. So it gives the ESB that buffer and that comfort level that they can do that. They have that agreement underlying with their MIC connection. So there is that case there. The fluctuating load that we do see when, as I say, if it's a fully deployed data center, you have your 24/7 365, where traditional manufacturing may have ramped up and ramped down, as we've seen traditionally in Ireland, and with the large manufacturers like Intel. They change their shift patterns, etc., to work alongside the ESB to balance that load. So in the evenings, when there was a high demand, or in the mornings before work, obviously before COVID and before remote working, but there was those fluctuations that they balanced it out and they changed their shift patterns. You can't necessarily do that with a fully deployed data center, but also there are things that when the operator does know that there is some strain coming onto the grid, they can offboard some of the information and tune down some of the areas of the data center and put it onto a different node if they have that the overall topology. And if they're a large network, say with the likes of the big five, the Metas and the Googles, they can put some of the data into different areas, into different geographies, to help balance the load. And that's what they do. Their agreements, their standing agreements. But as I say, working there for the last number of years, I know the agreements in place, but I think it's only been used once in about 6 years.
But how did you use it? Is there a regulation of how much the grid can use it? Is it only a case of emergency, or
Yeah.
how random and how tightly regulated is it?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe just step it. So it's one of the mechanisms that in Ireland anyway the grid operator uses to balance the system, whereby they issue an instruction to a data center and require them to reduce their demand over a very, very short space of time. There's a mandatory curtailment regime in Ireland. And also there's a target in our climate action plan that we'd have a certain amount of demand connecting to the electricity grid that would be flexible. And that's a lever that the grid operator could pull. But I think it's important to say that the grid operator expresses that lever as a kind of a last resort. So there's a number of different options, a number of different steps it would actually take before getting to that point. And maybe I'm beyond my bailiwick here now, but just in terms of the different load profiles of a data center, depending on its use case, like if you're comparing a regular enterprise data center, it's got quite a flat load, so it's predictable and probably easier to manage from a flexible demand point of view. But then if you were to look at the larger AI hyperscale data centers, I'm assuming the low profile is a lot more difficult to manage, and therefore it's a little bit more difficult to offer that flexible demand. So that's kind of half a question to Andrew, but
No, I think you've articulated correctly there, Keith. I think that's exactly what the large hyperscalers do. As you know, as the early warning comes in that the supply board sees that there will be a requirement to offload some of the capacity, they can do that because they can diversify depending on the countries that they're in, etc. They can move their data, etc. And then it's a less there's less requirement on the grid. So there is ways around it for the larger guys. For the smaller hosting sites and the co-location, they can't really do that because it's not their data. The rate model is it's somebody else's information, so it's a steady load.
That is so interesting. So essentially, if you have a bunch of things all over Europe, you could balance the load just, using you could also optimize your energy use then if you can do that, I suppose, and just to make sure that across the board you always spend the minimum possible in the different grids. I don't know. I'm just speculating how.
It's a lot. It's one of the last levers that they would pull. If they thought that the data center was in threat of going down or any brownouts or anything like that, then they would put some of the data somewhere else. But it's not something that they ultimately the data center is located in a certain area because of the transmission of data between their own network. So it's and the capacity and the data is what is their primary objective. So not to trivialize it, but I suppose the energy usage is a secondary thing. Like it's a huge bill, but it's not their main focus. It's more about what's
I understand.
going on. Yeah.
I understand. There's not at all, because resilience is basically the main thing. And because I assumed originally when you guys said that, you can adapt to the grid, that you could stop consuming because they could just pull in, the units, the diesel units, and they stop consuming and off you go. But then when you said that you can move loads and stuff, this is when I start this kind of. But I see, like, this is emergency only type thing.
Yeah, primarily that's what we do. That's what the larger hyperscalers would do, is would be going to diesel power for a short period of time. They don't, obviously they don't want to do that, but yeah, whatever the backup power generation is, just to give the national grid that little bit of buffer for when it's required.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that. And Attila asks, is there an exact number of or estimation of how much money will be spent on the network development for the Irish grid in the next 5 years? You moved some numbers, Keith, but I don't know whether investments in the grid was
yeah,
one
so
of
that
them.
was that was all around the actual spend and investment in the data center sector, not necessarily grid investment. But there's been a few very, very positive announcements in Ireland whereby Airgrid, ESB, and Irish Water have been assigned significant sums from the Exchequer, primarily to meet kind of funding gaps and also to fund the necessary grid infrastructure. So that I don't have the exact figures, but it's expressed in the multiple billion euro that's been issued to will be issued to Airgrid, ESB, and Irish Water over the next 2 to 3 years. So that's primarily to fund that grid infrastructure. But I don't have exact figures.
I mean, I don't either. But what I know is Europe in general, I can't really speak of other countries, but Europe in general requires massive investments everywhere. I don't think there is a country that is like invested properly or over-invested. Everything is under-invested generally. So the requirement is there. Whether it's going to be made or not, we'll see. Okay,
Yeah,
Brian says, go on.
yes,
Sorry.
I think under invested. I suppose if you're assessing it now, but I think the speed at which the data center sector and the AI sector has developed over the last 2 to 3 years has probably caught everyone off guard, including grid operators and transmission system operators. So probably cutting them a little bit of slack, I think.
Yeah, there is no transmission, no transition without transmission. That's what the EU
Yeah,
says. I was
exactly.
going to say, you guys, at least your demand is going up, with the data centers. For us, the problem in Spain is our demand is down compared to 2008. Yes, we do have a ton of grid. We don't even know how much of grid power is there, it's kind of like a black box. So a lot of it, probably, if you were to look at it in terms, we're actually above. But in terms of energy consumption in the grid, we're below 2008. You kind of need new demand, but then if you do have new demand, then you also require new investment, and the same pool of people, the less demand has to like pay for all of that. So in the end, I don't know, we'll see how it ends up. Okay, so Brian, did you consider a special tariff for these data centers in Ireland? What were the consideration? This is a good point, actually. Do you have like an energy intensive tariff, or how are they considered data centers? Are these any other user, or do they pay more or less than other people their energy?
Sorry.
So go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, no. I think yeah. So they're largely treated as a demand customer. So they pay use of system charges and network charges. We've also brought in kind of various types of carbon taxes. But maybe Andrew, do you have any other insights in terms of like specific tariffs? I'm not aware of them.
No, I'm not aware of specific ones. Obviously, they are a high demand user, and then obviously your connection cost goes up, which are MIC. So the larger hyperscalers, when they're putting in the connection permission for 200 megawatts or whatever, yeah, obviously they're paying a premium, and also paying a premium on their unit rate, because they're such a heavy user. But I don't think there's any specific tariffs that we put in. And as I touched on in the presentation, maybe we should have put a tariff on that they reinvest in the grid, and ultimately that they pay for that reinvestment and upgrading.
Yeah, and like that just comes back to one of my original points in terms of incentivizing data center development and pulling the right levers. Like they can facilitate the connection of quite a lot of renewables, but within their overall grid connection application and the assessment of that, TSOs or grid operators can require I suppose funding from these demand users that can be allocated for grid infrastructure, grid expansion, given the burden that some of these assets do place in the grid. So it is something that I think should be looked at with a keener eye.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but what we're looking at in the case of Spain, for example, is that there is even like, why are we not considered like electric intensive like factories are? Which pay a lot less because we consume that much. And I'm like, yeah, you even pay less, then, especially when it's an outsize, like you guys, you have 20% almost, so if you're getting into that sort of condition, that's where, the problems start appearing. And it's obvious, you just have to look online, and there's news pieces every day about how in the US ratepayers are paying for the hyperscalers bills, really. And you want to avoid that, because this is the beginning of the end in terms of any local government will be able to stop any project anytime if there is local opposition. So anyway, there is nothing at the moment. There is nothing here either. I think most countries have nothing, but I agree that it would help greatly. Maybe we need to create a two-tier system where if you want grid connection, then you can pay a premium, and then you have quicker access to it. I think that could be something that could be discussed for sure. So thank you very much. We've come to the end of the webinar. I really love this. I think there is so much to learn. I hope that Andrew and Keith, you guys can come to the event. It would be lovely to see you here. I don't know if it's something that you're looking more in more detail, because I love to meet you as well. And there is a lot to learn here. I hope that people in the audience learned as much as I did. And thank you very much for your time, Andrew. Thank you very much for your time, Keith. You not only came to learn, you also came to meet people like Andy and Keith. Even though you didn't meet them in person, you have their details. Reach out to them if you have anything for them. The point of webinars is that you learn the information, but also who is the person that can help you develop your own data center or whatever it is that you need. So thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much to everyone, and see you next time.